We, as soybean farmers in the United States, have a 35 to 40-year relationship with China. The tariffs definitely affected us there, so many people that just couldn't continue to operate.
China had driven most of the companies into bankruptcy, most of the U.S. companies into bankruptcy at that point.
Xi Jinping had said to me, if our people get to know each other, then our countries can get along.
In China, a dual circulation economic model is underway to mitigate the effects of protectionism.
因为贸易战的关系，就减掉了差不多将近也有200多人吧。
Both superpowers brace for the possibility of a financial war.
There are two pillars of U.S. dominance in the global financial system that allow it to sanction countries.
I do think the invention of the digital yuan will become a very important catalyst for the internationalization of the RMB.
This is Muscatine, a town along the Mississippi River in the state of Iowa. It may seem odd, but China and Muscatine are bound by deep ties. Those ties are bringing the relationship between the world's two superpowers down from the realm of geopolitics and directly into everyday lives. Back in 1985, an unknown county official named Xi Jinping made his first trip to the United States. He was part of a government delegation sent to study animal feed. Sarah Lande was part of a small group of people who hosted him.
I'm coming in to have a cup of tea and tell you a little bit more about China. This is the table where Xi Jinping had a potluck dinner with us. He seemed like a person happy to be in America, because he said it's the first time he'd been to America, and he had question. We had been told that he read Mark Twain, so we're right on the Mississippi River. That was great, and he loved the farmland and the openness of it all. China was just opening up, and we were eager to learn more from them, and maybe them from us also.
The young Xi Jinping slept in the bedroom of a teenage boy in this house, and even learned to drive a car.
当时当地的友好城市委员会特地安排他们住在 host family 家里，所以这是德沃切克夫妇特地为他们安排的一个房间。这个房间呢，就是他儿子的房间。这个墙上有一张照片，就是85年的时候，当时的莎拉兰德女士带着他们游密西西比河的场景。
In 2012, Xi came back to Muscatine, now as China's vice president.
And when he went in the door, there was just smiles on both sides that couldn't be contained. And then he said, I've met with President Obama, Hillary Clinton, Vice President Biden. And they said, why are you coming to Iowa? And he turned to the old friends and said, because of you. So this Air China 747 flew from D.C. to Moline, Illinois. And all these guys got like in limos to come down here for 1 hour. Took the limos back. This is Lucy Landy, and President Xi gave her a gift of a beer. This is my son, Chris. This photo was taken the night Xi Jinping was here meeting with old friends. Xi Jinping had said to me, you know, if we can have exchanges in all areas, sports, business, arts, if our people get to know each other, then our countries can get along.
他2012年面对着当时所有接待过的他们的老朋友，还有当时的老州长他们一行，他说了一句非常动情的话 ：“To me, you are America.”
Those visits by President Xi changed the course of Muscatine's development. To see how interconnected China and America are, you only need to take a walk around this Midwestern town. From a swank $40 million riverfront hotel and convention center, built with the help of a Chinese investor, to exchange programs in China for Muscatine students, to Chinese interest in a proposed international riverport in the upper Mississippi River. And the biggest Chinese investor has been Glad Cheng, the man who bought the farmhouse Xi stayed in and turned it into a friendship house.
Glad's a wonderful guy. I've met him many years ago, and he has really contributed a great deal to Muscatine. Certainly, he has brought some development.
This is one of Glad Cheng's more iconic contributions to the city. The new Merrill Hotel and Conference Center overlooks the river. Cheng has a sizable stake in the property. Cheng made his millions in China and then decided in 2015 to split his time between Muscatine and Beijing. He had a dream of global kumbaya.
能够跟当地几家大的企业一起共同发起投资，这家酒店其实是解决了当地接近100多人的就业，这是一个非常好的事情。那事实上，在这么小的一个艾瓦的一个城市，这么高星级的酒店，应该来说是艾瓦最好的酒店。可能这个消费力和实实在在的商业投资来说，这个收益并不是非常匹配。但可能这从商业上来说是还不是最好的一个投资。但是这一点投资之后呢，带来的延伸的效应，我觉得，至少当地人会觉得啊，这里有这么一个故事，有这么和中国有这么一个友好的故事，不仅仅停留在文化或者教育等方面的交流，更实实在在也带来商业上的一种投资和交流。所以，如果说我们能够起到一点点示范作用，能够有更多的人，大家都会有这种想法，去让两个国家很好的相处。那就像这个当时这个马斯卡廷这个有趣的故事，我们的中国领导人和当地的普通老百姓之间，如果有这种相处的方式的话，那我想这个无论对两国人民、对两个国家来说，都是一个天大的好事。
Cheng was one of thousands of Chinese investors in the U.S. before ties soured. China's direct investment in the U.S. dropped from $5.4 billion in 2018 to $5 billion in 2019, the lowest level since the recession year of 2009. And from January to March 2020, Chinese direct investment in the U.S. virtually vanished to just $200 million.
其实真的是最大的遗憾吧，因为我们从开始来美国来艾奥瓦，都是在一个两国之间非常友好、沟通非常顺畅的一个状态下来的。到今年，哎呀，由于政治上的原因，政治上我们也帮不上忙。说实在的，我们普通一介百姓，大家只能是看的这个变化，其实是挺可惜的。
When decisions are made at the top levels between countries, that trickles down to what happens in small town America right here in Muscatine that is felt. And so the thing that I think that we can really hope for and count on is that the relationships between countries will be rebuilt and that this will be a temporary stop between investors coming into the country and certainly into Muscatine.
An initiative by a major Muscatine industry, Kent Corporation, to create an international riverport could have been a game changer. Costco, a state-owned Chinese shipping company, expressed interest in the project. But with ties worsening by the day, all talks have ground to a halt. Two hours' drive away from Muscatine is where you will find the Kimberly Farm.
who's going up there. Come on.
And the most famous American farmer in China, Rick Kimberly. Kimberly rose to fame after President Xi visited here in 2012.
President Xi, when he was at our home, he talked about using our farm as a model of modern agriculture for China. And so we've begun a China-U.S. demonstration farm in Hubei province.
I am humbled and honored for the Kimberly family, Kimberly Farms, to be the first phase of the China-U.S. demonstration farm. I look forward to continuing to come back many times, help build relationships, and be friends with China.
The Friendship Farm was to be a part of a 4,000-acre endeavor featuring fruit groves, livestock, and even a Disney-style version of a small town in Iowa. It is connected to nearby Beijing by a road and high-speed rail link.
We, as soybean farmers in the United States, have a 35 to 40-year relationship with China. I've been to China over 20 times, visited over 60 cities, 12 provinces, so I've been over a good share of China. Grant, my son, and myself, we've been to China many, many times. We've helped work on this relationship.
But even his special relationship with China did not prevent him from being whacked by the U.S.-China trade war. After the U.S. decision to put tariffs on a long list of Chinese imports in 2018, China responded by placing a 25% tariff on soybeans.
China buys 60% of the world's exportable soybeans. So by far and away, they're the largest buyer of soybeans in the world. And we are one of the largest exporters of soybeans in the world. So when you get blocked out of one of the largest markets, there's certainly going to be a price impact. We saw lower prices the last couple of years.
The tariffs definitely affected us. Financially, our margins are tight anyway. And with the tariffs, the price came down even more. So profitability, there just wasn't any profit there. So many people that, and not all, but some that were financially affected, they just couldn't continue to operate.
A Phase 1 agreement was supposed to get China to buy more soybeans again. But as of end 2020, farmers say the sales to China are still lower than pre-trade war levels. The Kimberleys hope a Phase 2 deal will improve exports.
The U.S.-China relationship, we're kind of struggling right now. It has become a little contentious, and we would like to see it cooler heads prevail. We, as two large countries, the United States and China, we need each other. And we need China to continue to buy our products, our soybeans. It's very important to us that we have them as one of our large customers.
Both countries are the largest two economies in the world. They need to work together. They need each other. One by itself is not going to be as strong as both of them working together.
The moderate views of the people of Iowa are currently in a minority in the U.S. According to polls, a record high number of Americans have an unfavorable view of China. Biden is expected to continue a tough approach to Beijing.
If you look at what members of Congress are saying about China, just about everybody is worked up about something. You see a bit of a split. You see a few people worried about trade. What you also see is a growing number of people worried about human rights and democracy issues and rule of law and autonomy of Hong Kong. So I think one way or the other, there will be U.S.-China tension.
America alleges that China has damaged its economy, and the list of accusations are long. IP theft, currency manipulation, and unfair trade practices, leading to a trade deficit that reached over $400 billion in 2018, the year the trade war started. But to understand how that deficit happened, we need to turn the clock back to 1999. That was the year Chinese and US negotiators signed a historic trade deal that paved the way for China to join the World Trade Organization.
An agreement of this sort, with its breadth, with its scope, can help to anchor the relationship between the United States and China in a most fundamental way. And from that anchor, I think other good things will emerge.
For close to a decade, James Green has worked inside the US Embassy in China. He first lived in Wuhan in the 1980s. Later, he was in the meeting rooms at China's State Guest House and arranging presidential and ministerial meetings on both sides of the Pacific. He recalls the imperatives of the WTO agreement.
I actually worked at the embassy in two different stints. One was 1999 till 2001, and then a second time, 2013 to 2018, when I was the trade representative. There was a lot of optimism at that time for having China join this international institution that would benefit both Americans and Chinese. The Chinese leaders, Jiang Zemin and Zhu Rongji, really did make a lot of very difficult political choices to open up the economy. And I think we forget that, it was preordained that China was going to become the workshop of the world, and no, it really wasn't. Zhu Rongji laid off 40 million state-owned enterprise workers, and these people were used to the iron rice bowl, and they were not used to having to go hustle and drive a taxi, and that took political courage. And then from the US point of view, I do think there has been damage to the US economy from globalization. And I think for a lot of political leaders, there was a neglect of the downside of globalization, of what in the US people call flyover country. That is, not the two coasts, but the middle of America where there's a lot of manufacturing jobs that got lost. That said, there's also been great benefits. That is consumer benefits, benefits for industrial producers. I think one study said that 2000 to 2006, like manufacturing input costs went down by 10 or 12% because China was producing intermediate goods that was then going into US manufacturing, so helping US manufacturing. So certainly agricultural sectors, services, consumer goods, US companies benefited by having a market like China that was open. It certainly helped American brands. I think the NBA, for example, has done spectacularly well in China.
And really what was most incredible about Ira Kassoff's introduction to China, the most impressive
James Green also produces a podcast at the Georgetown University. Over the last 2 years, he has interviewed 24 former U.S. officials on China-related issues. So in the eyes of U.S. senior officials, what went wrong?
The distortions that happen because of the Chinese economy affect the global economy. And so the global economy, the global economic system doesn't have ways to deal with state enterprises that might have easy access to state capital, to protect a domestic market, or to environmental standards that aren't upheld. We kind of don't have mechanisms to deal with that. When China joined the WTO in 2001, it was really based on early 1990s global trading rules, and they weren't updated.
Whether the U.S. gained more than it lost in trading with China is still a subject of heated debate in the U.S. What's indisputable is a trade deficit of over $300 billion. A trade war was launched in 2018. It is still unclear whether the new administration will put a stop to it.
Hi, my name is Joe Mornville. I'm the president of Energy Independent Solutions. We do a wide mix of anything solar. Price of solar, I mean, when we started in the business, it was around $3 a watt for a module, and now, you know, a decent module, you're getting at under 50 cents. It's like a, you know, 1/8 the price or something.
The reason for the low costs? Chinese manufacturing. The U.S. was once a stronghold of solar module manufacturing, accounting for around a quarter of global solar module shipments in the early 2000s. But that started changing around 2010.
We stayed American-made up until maybe 2012, 2014, when we could no longer buy the product anymore, because at that point, you know, China had driven most of the companies into bankruptcy, most of the U.S. companies into bankruptcy at that point. Actually testified in the trade case in Washington for it. China basically subsidizes at their production level. So their product is coming off of the line before it goes into a container already carrying subsidy.
U.S. solar manufacturers were going broke. But the overall industry was growing fast. People found employment selling and installing the China solar modules.
Well, couldn't compete head-to-head with China, but it kind of improved the whole market. Everybody started to really step up to the plate. And then it started to, the financials started to make sense. You know, just started to steamroll from that point.
2016 was the best year on record for solar energy in the United States. Helped by cheap imports, solar installations doubled. That year, it seemed as though solar energy was about to revolutionize the energy sector and end American dependency on fossil fuels. Then, Trump got elected.
No more tariffs on the sun! Solar jobs for everyone! No more tariffs on the sun! Solar jobs for everyone! No more tariffs on the sun!
China solar modules were slapped with a 30% tariff in 2018 under Trump's trade war.
We're out here to fight against the solar tariffs that the Trump administration has imposed. We want to make sure that those don't hurt American workers in this growing industry. Solar's growing, we don't want to stop the growth.
The industry's top trade group, the U.S. Solar Industries Association, said solar installations plummeted as prices went up. 62,000 jobs in the solar industry were lost due to tariffs.
A 100-megawatt plant might be built over a 5-year period, and they need to know what the price is going to be over a 5-year period. And if you don't know what the tariff is, then you can't really predict what that cost is. When you start talking about adding 20% or 25% tariffs, that can kill a deal in a heartbeat. And it did, many of them.
A few solar module manufacturing plants did open, but the jobs created were overshadowed by those lost. Around 62,000 jobs were shed because of the tariffs.
I think it's very important that the U.S. and China work together for the greater good of the environment. Pollution is something that affects my wife and my kids, and whether they get cancer or whether they have lung issues. They need to get politics out of the way and start looking at the good of the human race and what we need to do in order to make things better and keep our families healthier.
Across the Pacific Ocean, Chinese businessmen, too, are reeling from the fallout of superpower rivalry. In one factory in Dongguan, it has been a roller coaster year for business.
贸易战这一块到美国的话，我们这一类的扫地机就增加了25%的关税。那25%的关税，这一轮损失的是谁？第一个，我们制造商、制造业；第二个就是代理业；第三个就是消费者。
For over a decade, Matsutech built its business as an OEM manufacturer for big Western brands. OEM stands for Original Equipment Manufacturer, and they're a class of companies that produces equipment that are then sold by someone else. In Matsutech's case, they supplied firms such as Philips and Honeywell. That strategy paid off for 2 decades, helping Matsutech grow into the world's second largest maker of robotic vacuum cleaners. But then, the trade war hit in 2019, and the company joined a long list of corporate casualties. Terry Wu says it was a moment of crisis for the company.
因为贸易战的关系，所以出口量是一直就是下滑了，所以我们当时就是整共的差不多的11条线，就是减掉了3条线，就减掉了3条线的人员，差不多将近也有200多人吧。那作为企业来讲，第一背负的社会责任，对员工的社会责任；第二，企业本身的这种对产品的某种感情和纠结在吧，所以我们内心其实是非常不好受的。那员工也是一样，那跟着我们企业一起打拼的这些员工，我们也不会想去轻易去放弃他。
Time for a rethink of corporate strategy.
最好的选择就是这台啪啪走，啪啪走。有了啪啪走智慧型。
Matsutech switched its focus to its own Jiawei Shu and Papazhou vacuum cleaners, promoting them on China's e-commerce platforms. Instead of focusing on the U.S. markets as OEM manufacturers, they will now focus on the China market.
像扫地机器人，在欧美的市场，它保持15%到17%的这种渗透率，是一直在持续的、稳定的。那中国从0.3%到1.7%，用了不到2年的时间，所以它的增比速度是非常快，是非常的快。所以那个时候我们就发现了这些问题，所以我们对自有品牌的这一块的规划，我们后续的重点，包括我们在中国大陆以及东南亚的国家，那我们就逐渐的去推广这一块的自有品牌的建设这一块。
Companies across China are now beginning to think the same way. President Xi emphasized that Chinese companies must now pursue a new development strategy he calls dual circulation, and move away from export-led growth. Aidan Yao was born in Liaoning, China, and now lives in Hong Kong. He has spent the last decade conducting in-depth research on the Chinese economy.
This strategy really consists of 2 parts. You got the inner circulation, which aims at extracting more of a domestic potential growth through the like of a consumption upgrade, innovation technology, and urbanization, so on and so forth. The outer circulation really defines the relationship that China wants to build with the rest of the world through things like trade collaboration, R&D internationalization, and further opening up of the capital markets, so on and so forth. Now, I think there are 2 elements that are quite new here. One is that Beijing is adamant that they're going to put more emphasis on the inner circulation because of the changing external environment. And secondly, I would imagine that some of the things that China has pushed very hard over the past few years in terms of a road and belt, in terms of investment in sensitive technologies will have to be watered down going forward, once again because of the changing external dynamic.
China needs this domestic circulation model to work. The WTO projected that even under a relatively optimistic scenario, the volume of world merchandise trade in 2020 would contract by 9%. It's clear the days of 20+% export growth are over for China. Matsutech is one amongst hundreds of Chinese suppliers now decoupling with their American clients. Companies like Nintendo, GoPro, Hasbro have accelerated plans to build factories in places such as India, Vietnam, and Mexico. There are many examples of decoupling in the press, but survey results reveal a different truth. It seems most American companies are not headed back home. Only about 4% of the more than 200 manufacturers surveyed by the American Chamber of Commerce in Shanghai said they will shift any production to the U.S. more than 75% said they don't intend to move production out of China, while 14% said they will shift some operations to other countries, and 7% planned on relocating domestically. Decoupling, it seems, is a greater focus in policy circles rather than actual business circles.
Certainly, the word of 2018 in Washington, D.C. was reciprocity. The word of 2019 and of 2020 is decoupling. That's what almost everyone is talking about. Now, it's interesting to note that that idea is a Chinese idea, first discussed in China over the last 2 decades because of their concerns about being too close to the United States. And they exported that idea to the U.S. We imported it, and now we've made it our own. The reality is that although there are some places where we can reduce our relationship with China, particularly in advanced technologies, the idea that we're going to thoroughly decouple trade, investment, people flows is beyond impossible. And even if we did do that, the likelihood that we would actually isolate China or weaken them or make us safer is not likely to occur.
Whether it is Starbucks, Apple, or General Motors, scores of American brands must continue to operate in China, as the market is simply too big to give up. The U.S.-China Business Council, a trade group representing more than 200 U.S. companies that do business with China, polled its members in June 2020. They found that up to 83% of the companies counted China as either the top or among the top 5 priorities for their company's global strategy.
China is the world's largest trading nation. Its major customers are in the West. The financial flows going both ways are largely between the West and China. Labor flows, knowledge flows, financial flows, enormous between China and America and Europe. So in that sense, it's very hard to have what I call a serious Cold War when the two participants are economically so intertwined. When you have the world's largest trading nation producing, for example, 60 to 70% of the products in Walmart or in Costco, and you're saying don't trade, you have a problem. Where are you going to get all these products? You're talking about an extensive relationship. Breaking it down has almost an unimaginable cost.
It's been a bruising trade war for U.S. and China. And in recent months, there are concerns that the trade and technology war might expand into a volatile new front, finance. A financial war will weaponize capital. In 2020, the U.S. government moved to prevent a federal retirement fund from investing billions of dollars in shares of Chinese companies. A bill to force Chinese companies to delist from U.S. stock exchanges if they do not open their books to U.S. regulators was also passed unanimously by the Senate in May the same year. What could a financial war look like? One scenario, a dispute over SWIFT. The world pays for practically everything, mainly using the SWIFT International Payment Network. Every day, $5 trillion US gets transferred across the world using this system.
There are 2 pillars of U.S. dominance in the global financial system that allow it to sanction countries and track fund flows. The first is SWIFT, which is a messaging service that nearly all banks use to communicate payments information. SWIFT is based in Brussels, but American policymakers have enormous influence over it. For example, after 9/11, the US Treasury set up what's known as a terrorist finance tracking program, which used information about payments subpoenaed from SWIFT to investigate Al-Qaeda and other terror networks. The other pillar of U.S. dominance is a vast network of U.S. banks that serve as intermediaries. The control of this infrastructure gives the U.S. immense power to trace financial flows around the globe, as well as to cut entities off from using this infrastructure through sanctions.
Questions that used to be unthinkable are now being considered. Could the U.S. sanction China through this SWIFT dollar payment system? Or could it order the big banks, which clear dollar payments in America, to stop serving Chinese banks? There is a massive experiment underway in China, which hints at how seriously the country is responding to the threat of financial war. President Xi has designated blockchain to be one of the country's top innovation priorities. And China pushed ahead with trials of its new digital currency, taking early tentative steps that could one day free the world from relying on the dollar for international transactions. To understand how a digital yuan works, first, look to the cashless payment ecosystem in China. Even a trip to a place of worship is cashless. E-wallets and systems like WeChat Pay and Alipay are now dominant instead of cash. And widespread adoption of cashless payments have paved the way for China's central bank to begin experimenting with the digital yuan. In 2020, China became the first major economy to conduct a real-world test of a national digital currency.
Electronic payment, we call it EP, is actually a very important pre-step for the digital currency. Since we have Alipay and Tencent WeChat payment, and all of these payment methods enable people to get used to a new way of making payment. So I think EP actually paved the way for the DC, the digital currency.
China's digital currency is now being trialed in 4 Chinese cities domestically. But the ultimate aim is to accelerate the internationalization of the yuan. China's former central bank governor said China's digital currency aims to push back against US dollar hegemony. China is the top trading partner of many countries, but its years-long ambition of internationalizing the yuan has progressed slowly. The yuan accounted for about 2% of global reserves and 1.76% of cross-border payments by June 2020. An ambitious plan for a digital yuan could set the motion for change, starting with China's borders with ASEAN.
We have 10 countries in ASEAN countries. Many countries are linking border with China. Do you have any idea how many people are traveling back and forth from China in the border regions, like China and the Vietnam border, and China and Myanmar border? So there are tens of millions of people just doing business between the borders. So in the past, if you are a Myanmar farmer, you have your fresh bamboo, you want to sell it to Chinese trading partner, and then you have your Myanmar dollar, and then you have to convert it to Chinese yuan. Now with digital currency, our friends in Myanmar and Vietnam and Laos, they don't need to open up a bank account in China, which is very hard. Now they can download an app, and then they can put their money into the authorized exchange post, and then the exchange post will issue the Chinese DC into their wallet. And they can use it for trade immediately. So they will enable the people's connection. They will boost the border trade. And with this change in the border, and then the influence will, go bigger and bigger.
In the US, the digital yuan experiment is raising concern. Systems like SWIFT has given the US leverage over other states, as sanctions that cut a country off from this network are usually a death sentence. Iran is a case in point. Washington has been increasingly relying on sanctions as a foreign policy tool. But the sharpness of that tool is now in question as China's digital currency takes root globally.
The scenario might be that Iran or another US adversary imports the digital currency infrastructure developed by China to set up its own digital currency and to conduct cross-border transactions with willing nations without the ability of US authorities to monitor or sanction these transactions. So in the case of Iran, if you remember, the US and its European allies used financial sanctions to bring Iran to the negotiating table for the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or the Iran deal, which was signed in 2015. At the time of the deal, Iran could not do business with US and with Europe. It had been cut off from SWIFT, meaning that it could not pay for imports or receive payments for exports, and its economy had been essentially crippled. So the US and its negotiating partners were able to leverage this and agree to lift some of these sanctions in return for limits to Iran's nuclear program. The threat that digital currencies pose is that they could be used to conduct cross-border transactions that A, don't need to use the SWIFT messaging service to communicate between banks, and B, they eliminate the need for correspondent banks because any user can make a payment directly to any other user anywhere in the world. So if China were to develop these cross-border technologies, then it would be capable of avoiding US oversight and US sanctions would be weakened. And in that scenario, then Iran could be conducting activities like enriching uranium, like building up its nuclear program, which would be out of US oversight.
It is precisely because of US financial sanctions that Huawei's chief financial officer, Meng Wanzhou, has been embroiled in a lawsuit in Canada and unable to return to China. Such cases may become a thing of the past if China's digital currency takes root. Trade war, financial war, and a war of words. These are the legacy of the Trump presidency. So profound has been its impact that the legacy is likely to continue in the new administration.
I think the current area of competition and confrontation and conflict with China will outlast the Trump administration. Some of the issues, particularly around technology and technology ecosystems, are ones that will be with us for years to come. I wouldn't be necessarily so pessimistic. My view is the last 5 years, sure, they've been difficult in US-China relations, but that doesn't mean the next 5 years will therefore be difficult. We have an ability to adjust our policies and to interact with each other in a way that's productive. Climate change is a natural one that we could have overlapping interests. I think having in Afghanistan and the greater Middle East, peace there, yes, I think that's an area for potential discussion with the Chinese. North Korea is another natural one.
两国有分歧是正常的，但是要以理性和务实的态度处理分歧。双方这个问题已经够多的了，不能再做加法，而要想办法做减法。
大家现在目前听到的声音都是负面的声音，正面的声音太少。这个对任何一个人的负面情绪影响太大。对酒店的投资现在影响还是比较大。那么从商务交流啊和旅游的角度来说，相对来的人就会更少一些。那在中美之间关系如果不好的时候，我们更应该去守护这份友好，这份真难得的友谊，能够把这个故事慢慢的还是从民间，从下一代学生之间慢慢的把它传递下去，而不是说大家都断了，是吧？这个就太可怕了。
The ties between the United States and China, I think we need to build on the relationships that we've already had and try to repair them. I think it's easy for us to overlook some of those personal relationships that have been developed over the years, and those can be used and are actually critical into healing some of the bigger wounds that exist in our world today.
I don't know about intellectual property stealing or something, but I wish America would just get stronger, do our own research. You know, you can't just criticize them. You study with your own science, be good, be the best, and then, you know, then you can compete.
On the next episode, a tech war brews between the two superpowers.
我们华为正经历一个美国第三轮制裁的困难时期。
China is building its own internet focused on very different values, and it's now exporting their vision of the internet to other countries.
The sparring between the United States and China has taken a new twist, with student visas now in the firing line.
你们国家跟国家打仗，不要再让我们学生好无辜呀。
I think being a Chinese person in America, especially this year with the coronavirus pandemic, a lot of that makes me feel or relate to how it might be similar to how Muslims and brown people felt after 9/11. There is a white supremacist, nativist, xenophobic atmosphere that has been inflamed